punctuated one. I want to talk a little in detail about an interesting moment, which do you have this part here, these three together? Yeah? Okay. Let me see. We sort of broke up the pages. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. So I want you to look firstly at the third example in pianissimo in A minor. This is in the development section. And it's almost, I'd say Schubertian. That's a word I use a lot for this sonata, which is very interesting because Schubert was actually born the year this sonata was published. So take that for what you will. So it's this again, it's a strange tonality to be in. We're in A minor when the piece is in E flat major. And he takes the main theme. And that, when I first was learning this, I thought, that's odd, because it doesn't really come out of anything else. Usually the development develops themes that had been already, used. So I wonder where that comes from. And literally, honestly, just a few days ago, I think I figured it out. I'm not sure if it's right, but it makes sense. So if you look at the example right above that, you have this from the first page of the sonata. So you have the main theme, and then this a sort of punctuated theme, and that, I think, comes in the development, but twice. You have the main, 1, 2, and then this. Which it's very possible. So I thought that was interesting. I just wanted to show that. Since I had thought about it so much and then finally figured something out. So moving on to the next example. This is the very end of the development. We end up in D minor. This is the first time he writes a slur on this motive, by the way. So in D minor, this shouldn't be an A flat, right? This should be a G sharp. And what the ear of the day, they were very sensitive to harmonies, because all of these things that we hear, Beethoven does, and then later on, Wagner, Strauss, our ears are used to so many different things that we don't even notice something like this. But at the time, of course, this was something that they would notice from here to, what is that? Because we were just in D minor. It should resolve, right? And then he could have gone something like that. And then back to the tonic, but he didn't do that. He just sort of skipped all of that modulation and uses an enharmonic modulation, which was sort of rare at the time. And so I like to, when practicing something like this, actually resolve it the way it should be resolved, just to get my ear used to that, so then I myself am surprised. If you play it a couple times, and then you play it really is a surprise, and you can sort of then feel what he meant. So let's get to the end of the last movement now. The recapitulation pretty much is what we would expect. There is a sort of a swell into the subdominant that gives us a little more energy going forward. But then we get to the end, and then there's, of course, coda, which is also something that hadn't always been used in I think he uses a coda only in the previous sonata, in the C major sonata. The first two don't have a coda in the first one. And it is a restatement, very triumphant, in C minor of the main motive. And he goes back. And then he again states what I call the amorous or the love theme. Again, I think he liked it maybe as much as I do. You couldn't end the movement without having it a few more times. And then we get to another interesting moment at the end, where the main theme is inverted rhythmically. So it was at the beginning strong, weak, right? Here he writes the opposite. We're going weak to strong, weak to strong. So and that's how he ends. So that's an interesting. As I mentioned from the beginning, the C major chord from the exposition again we have right here, starting the second movement, the largo con grande spesso. Oh, before I get into the actual analysis of it, I just wanted to say a couple things about it. In this movement, it seems Beethoven almost asks the impossible many times, especially considering the piano he had at the time. It's this expansive, very slow music, meditative, almost in solitude, contemplative music, where it's hard to, I mean, if you have just one chord, I mean, on the piano of Beethoven's day, it must have just sounded boom and then it's gone, right? There's not much you can do with it. And it brings me to a point. Beethoven had written a letter the year before, actually the year of this, 1796. He wrote to his friend. Well, he made friends with piano makers. I mean, he knew what he was doing. It's like we all need to make friends with piano technicians. He makes friends with piano makers. And he wrote to Streicher, who was in Vienna. He said, this is a quote, "The forte piano is still the least developed of all instruments. Often one thinks one is merely listening to a harp. And I'm delighted, my dear fellow, that you are one of the few who realize that one can also make the forte piano sing. I hope the time will come when the harp and the forte piano will be treated as two entirely different instruments." So, in a way it's a compliment, but in another way it's sort of asking him to do more. And this is a theme throughout Beethoven's life. He was never happy with the piano, which, as you can see in the music, as I said, he's asking the impossible. He wants the piano to be more expanded in tone and volume, etc. And we'll get to some of the impossible. I've already talked about just the fact that it's so slow and there was no sustain on those instruments. One of the most characteristic, I think, parts of this sonata, not parts of it, the characteristics, is the use of silence. There's almost as much silence, and even more at the beginning, than there are notes. And again, it's almost mood writing. I mean, if we're going back to the idea of setting setting a story or some type of an image, I mean, there are many things you can think of here. I think of Beethoven in the evening, maybe playing something in candlelight, or perhaps walking through the woods, thinking about many things. Eventually he starts thinking about the beloved, when we get to another very romantic theme. Let's actually get to that theme. It's the next example, the A-flat theme. You see. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say one important thing. Can we go back to the main theme? Sure. Yeah. Again, it's like the main subject from the first movement. The first movement had falling thirds. This one has rising seconds. It's again a two-note motive, and then a falling third, and then a second. So it's, again, he's playing with two notes. He takes a compositional idea and uses it to its maximum into all aspects of the sonata. He was very, very, very concerned with unity within a piece of music, not just separate movements put together, but something that makes a bigger whole. Okay, now we can go on to the A-flat major. This, again, to me is a very romantic, warm, almost yearning melody. Tenuto in the right hand over staccato in the left hand. Let me just play a little bit of it. So again, the name Schubert comes to mind. And Schubert actually was probably very inspired by this sonata, because in his C minor sonata in the second movement, which is in A flat major, he does something quite similar, which I'll play right here. Again, staccato bass and the tenuto melody. Beethoven had done something also in the second movement of the second sonata, opus 2, number 2, right here. But I think in this sonata, opus 7, it's much, I think it goes beyond what he had done earlier. Also, interesting of note, this theme, I'm not sure consciously, probably consciously, I mean, he uses it again in opus 110. It's the same here. Exactly the same notes. So, I don't know, is it also a rather romantic, or something that I associate with some type of a love, the opus 110 as well. So, it was in the air for sure. So, moving on to, yes, what was the next example of the G's? Yeah. So it brings us to the impossible part, where he asks for a crescendo on one note. On a very slow note. So, yeah, he arrives at this interesting, I guess we're sort of, yeah, we've arrived at G major, which would be the dominant. So, he does. Which in itself is odd. We have these extremes of range. I mean, that's basically the end of the piano. As when he goes to the F, and a few bars later, that is the end of the piano of his day. And this is almost the end. The F right here being the end of the range. So he's at the very extremes of the range. Something that he, again, uses later in other compositions. He actually uses it at the end of this sonata, at the end of this movement, where you have this also very, very wide spacing here. And it brings to mind, I think the examples are up there, the fourth concerto, you remember. Which is the next example. You have these trills and then it just is. Right. So we all know that one. We all know all of these, of course. But yeah, putting them together. This was something that he did, even in 109, he does this. This expansive range, it meant something to him. Experimenting with sonorities. So moving on, the next example is just the way he gets back to the restatement of the theme. Since we were talking about thirds, I thought I should include this. It's a long chain of thirds going down. Again, I see this as sort of a rustic scene, again, for thinking things. Definitely with nature, something out in the country. There we have the thirds again at the very beginning of the theme. Of note, since I'm going to be going over this quickly now, the next example would be when it comes into E flat minor, it's sort of foreshadowing the trio, which is to come in the next page, which is in E flat minor, a very strange key for the time, although Beethoven was always interested in these very flat keys, even from his teenage years when he was writing, and it was published work, the first he wrote 3 piano quartets. And the first one, I believe, I think it's the first one, starts in E flat major, it's a slow introduction, and then the actual allegro is in E flat minor, which is very strange. but he just loved these flat keys and used them. The interesting part about this little section, after the E flat minor, he goes into C flat major. And the bass here, this two-note motive, the B flat and then the C flat, which could be a B natural, as we'll see, he translates into the next movement, where the octaves, he uses this. So it could be him setting that up. I mean, maybe I'm pulling at strings here, by grasping, but I think, you know, someone like Beethoven, who was so interested in unity and so meticulous in his writing, I think these things are not coincidental. Moving on to the trio, which is again what I said is already in E flat minor. This is, again, I think just an illustration, just an evocation of nature. It's suddenly in this beautiful, maybe summer day, you know, it starts to rain, gusts of wind. And I believe that this is a perfect example of showing how literal Beethoven was within his dynamics. You know, other composers, you might write a forte piano weak, doesn't mean we can't play a crescendo up to or out, you know, away from. But Beethoven, if he doesn't write crescendo, you don't play crescendo. You just don't. And if he writes it, you really play it. And I think this is one of those examples. I'm not going to play it right now because I will play it when I get to the whole sonata, and I want to move on just to save time. Oh, we can skip that. Okay, let's go on to the, yeah, I already talked about that. This, I do want to get to this because it is sort of important. This is the one with the X's. I just want to talk very briefly about metric articulation and mention the book Schnabel's Interpretation of Piano Music by Conrad Wolf. If you haven't read it, I think it's worth a read. Definitely, it's very interesting. And he talks about the way you can set up stresses in four-bar phrases. And the X's show these stressed bars. The second from the bottom is what is when you have a stress in bar 1 and 2, you skip 3. He called it passing the third bar, and then the stress in 4. I wanted to play very quickly, since we don't have time, I'll just play one of these. The Mozart example, you can see he has I came up with this. You could also have a stress in bar 2 here, but I think it's better in bar 1, or bar 1 and 2. And then you have the stress on 4, and when you get to the next 4-bar phrase, you have stresses on 1 and 3, making the entire 8 bars asymmetric, which for some reason makes it sound more natural. And I think in Mozart, this is probably one of the most important things when I'm working on a piece, is figuring out where the stresses are within the 4 or 8-bar phrase. Otherwise,